A millionaire pays to spend one night with a virgin woman, believing everything can be owned. But everything changes when the young woman, driven by desperation and conviction, agrees to a contract that should never exist. If this story caught your attention, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Stay tuned. Blake Harrison surveyed Manhattan from his penthouse office on the 78th floor of the Harrison Tower. The city sprawled beneath him like a circuit board of lights and motion, a living organism that pulsed to the rhythm of money and ambition. At T. 43, Blake had built an empire that spanned real estate, technology, and finance. The Harrison Group was not just a corporation, it was an extension of himself, calculated, unyielding, and seemingly invincible. The Morgan acquisition papers are ready for your signature, Mr. Harrison. Diane Winters, his chief of staff, placed a leather portfolio on his desk. Her efficiency was why she had survived 12 years in his inner circle, a record in an environment where Blake routinely discarded people who no longer served his purpose. And the board's concerns? Blake didn't look up from his monitor, where stock prices crawled across the screen like vital signs, addressed. As you suggested, we leveraged their personal investments against them. Everyone's aligned now. Diane's tone was as crisp as her tailored suit. She knew better than to inject emotion into business matters. Blake nodded, finally turning to face her. And the PR strategy for the healthcare divestment? We're framing it as strategic realignment. The media will focus on the innovation fund we're establishing, not the 5,000 jobs being cut. Blake signed the documents with a fountain, pen that had once belonged to his father, a man who'd built a modest construction company and died believing in concepts like loyalty and community. Concepts Blake had methodically excised from his vocabulary, along with words like compromise and compassion. "Is there anything else?" he asked, already returning his attention to the numbers on his screen. Diane hesitated, something she rarely did. The executive committee would like to discuss succession planning at next week's retreat. Blake's expression remained unchanged, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. Succession planning implies, "I'm going somewhere, Diane. I assure you I'm not." "Of course not, sir. It's merely procedural." "Then tell them the procedure is unnecessary. We'll focus on the European expansion instead." He dismissed her with silence, returning to his digital fortress of spreadsheets and projections. After she left, Blake loosened his tie slightly. Succession. The word itself was an affront. At 43, he was in his prime, his mind sharper than ever. The Harrison Group was him, and he was the Harrison Group. The idea that anyone, especially his board, would contemplate a Harrison-less future was not just premature, it was mutiny. His phone buzzed with a message from Vance Mitchell, his head of security and longtime associate, the only person Blake might have called a friend if he believed in such indulgences. "Need to discuss something sensitive, not over comms." Blake's jaw tightened. Vance wasn't prone to dramatics, which meant whatever he needed to discuss was significant. He sent a terse reply, "My place, 9 p.m. The rest of the day unfolded with precision. Blake moved through meetings, calls, and decisions like a machine programmed for maximum efficiency. By 8:30 p.m., his driver delivered him to his Tribeca penthouse, a minimalist monument to masculine luxury, all steel, glass, and dark wood, with views that reinforced his position above the ordinary world. At precisely 9 p.m., Vance arrived. Unlike Diane's polished corporate demeanor, Vance carried himself with the quiet vigilance of someone who had seen the world's darker corners. "Drink?" Blake offered, pouring himself 2 fingers of Macallan 25. "No, thanks," Vance declined, settling, his large frame into a leather chair. "What I'm about to show you requires a clear head." Blake raised an eyebrow but said nothing, taking a seat across from him. Vance placed a tablet on the coffee table between them. "Someone in your organization has gone rogue. This appeared on an encrypted message board 3 days ago." Blake took the tablet, his expression unchanged as he read what appeared to be an advertisement. Exclusive opportunity for a single evening with one of America's most powerful men. Requirements: female 21 to 25, verified virgin. Compensation, $5 million upon completion. Complete discretion and compliance expected. You will do everything I command. Non-negotiable. This is absurd, Blake said, his voice dangerously quiet. I assume you've traced it. That's the problem. It was posted through our own secure servers, someone with high-level access. Blake set down his drink, untouched. Remove it. Already tried. It's been scrubbed from the original site, but it spread. There have been responses. Vance swiped to the next screen, and someone set up an elaborate verification process. 3 candidates have already been vetted. This is clearly an attempt to compromise me. Blake's mind was already calculating the potential damage to the Harrison Group, to the Morgan acquisition, to his carefully constructed persona. Yes, but it's sophisticated, not just a simple smear. This feels like the first move in a longer game. Vance hesitated. There's more. The candidates were told you're interested in a very specific type of woman, someone who's saving herself, not for religious reasons, but from personal conviction, the kind of woman who can't be bought, until now. Blake stood, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city lights below seemed suddenly like the eyes of countless anonymous watchers, all fixed on him. Who in my organization would have both the access and the motive, he asked, though he was already running through suspects in his mind. That's what I'm working on. The board members who were pushing the succession planning are at the top of my list. Blake turned, his expression hardening into resolve. Find whoever is behind this, and find these women who were contacted. What do you want to do about them? Nothing yet. I want to know who they are first. After Vance left, Blake remained by the window, his reflection ghostly against the backdrop of New York's glittering skyline. He had built his life around control of his environment, his company, his emotions. Now someone was attempting to wrest that control away, using a fabricated scenario designed to trigger every possible scandal in one calculated move. The following morning, Blake proceeded with his usual routine, betraying no hint of disturbance to his staff. But behind his composed exterior, his mind was systematically working through every possible permutation of the threat. By afternoon, Vance had information. One of the women dropped out after the initial vetting. Another was eliminated during background checks. But the third one, he handed Blake a file. She's interesting. Blake opened it to find a photograph of a young woman with clear blue eyes that seemed to look through the camera rather than at it. Her name was Emma Lawson, 23, a graduate student in journalism at Columbia. She worked part-time at a bookstore and as a freelance writer. Her mother was in need of an expensive heart surgery, not covered by insurance. Her background check showed no boyfriend, no significant relationships. A woman defined by independence and quiet determination. She's scheduled for a preliminary meeting tonight, Vance said. Not with you, obviously, but with someone claiming to represent you. Blake stared at the photograph, something stirring beneath his calculated exterior, not desire, but curiosity. This woman had agreed to sell something she had preserved through principle, not tradition. What did that say about her? About the values people claimed to hold until they were tested. Cancel the meeting, he said finally. And if she shows up anyway? Blake considered this. Then I'll meet her myself. That's exactly what someone is hoping you'll do. Precisely, but they expect me to hide, to deny, to distance myself from this pathetic scheme. Blake closed the file, his decision made. Instead, I'll confront it directly. If someone wants to play a game with me, they should know that I never enter a game I don't intend to win. That evening, as Emma Lawson prepared to meet a stranger about an offer that represented both salvation and sacrifice, she had no idea that Blake Harrison was preparing to intercept her, or that their meeting would set in motion a chain of events that would shatter the foundations of both their carefully constructed worlds. In her small apartment in Washington Heights, Emma stared at herself in the mirror, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back. She had dressed conservatively, dark jeans, white blouse, minimal makeup. This wasn't a date. It was a business transaction. The most important one of her life. You can do this, she whispered to her reflection. For Mom. Just one night. and it's over. Her phone buzzed with a text from the hospital where her mother was being monitored. Mrs. Lawson's condition stable but unchanged. Dr. Sullivan would like to discuss options tomorrow. Options. Emma nearly laughed at the euphemism. There were no options without money, and money was exactly what awaited her at the address she'd been given in Tribeca. All she had to do was walk through that door. Emma stepped out of the taxi in front of a sleek high-rise that seemed to pierce the New York sky. She checked the address again. This was definitely the place. The building's lobby was all marble and glass, with a security desk manned by a guard who looked like he moonlighted as a linebacker. "Emma Lawson," she said, surprised her voice didn't tremble. "I have an appointment." The guard checked his tablet. "Penthouse, Mr. Reynolds is expecting you." Reynolds, not Harrison. A middleman, she assumed, there to screen her before. The actual meeting with the mysterious billionaire. Emma's stomach twisted as she rode the elevator to the top floor, each ascending number on the digital display bringing her closer to a decision she never imagined making. The elevator opened, directly into a foyer where a man in a dark suit waited. He wasn't what she expected, older with the weathered look of someone who had seen too much. "Ms. Lawson, I'm Vance Mitchell. Please come in." Emma followed him into a vast living space, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Manhattan at dusk. The space was beautiful yet sterile, like a museum exhibit of how the wealthy lived rather than an actual home. "I thought I was meeting Mr. Reynolds," she said, remaining standing even as Vance gestured toward a seating area. "There is no Mr. Reynolds," came a voice from behind her. Emma turned to find herself face to face with a man she instantly recognized from news articles and business magazines. Blake Harrison, not a representative, but the man himself. He was taller than she expected, his presence filling the room in a way that made it seem smaller. His eyes, cold, assessing, swept over her with the detachment of someone appraising. "Property. You're Blake Harrison," she stated, working to keep her voice level. "And you're here to sell your virginity for $5 million, he replied, his tone clinical. "Now that we've established the obvious, shall we discuss what's really happening?" Emma felt her cheeks flush with a mixture of shame and anger. "I'm here because someone claiming to represent you made an offer I need to consider because my mother will die without surgery she can't afford." "I never made that offer." Blake moved to a sideboard and poured himself a drink. "The advertisement was placed without my knowledge or consent, by someone attempting to create a situation that could damage me." Emma's mind raced to process this information. So this was, what? A setup? Precisely. A rather elaborate one. Blake turned to face her. "The question is, why did you respond to it?" Emma straightened her spine, refusing to be intimidated. "I already told you. My mother needs a surgery that costs more than I'll make in 10 years. When you're desperate, you start considering options you never thought you would." Blake studied her, and Emma had the uncomfortable feeling he was reading more from her expression than she intended to reveal. "Your desperation is convenient for whoever orchestrated this," he said finally. "They knew exactly what type of person to target. Someone principled enough to have maintained their virginity into adulthood, yet practical enough to consider relinquishing it under the right circumstances." "You make it sound like I'm part of this plot against you," Emma said, her anger rising. "I'm not. I'm just trying to save my mother's life." Blake set down his untouched drink. "I believe you. Which is why I'm going to make you a legitimate offer." Emma tensed. "What kind of offer?" "I need to find out who in my organization is behind this scheme. To do that, I'm going to let them think their plan is working." His eyes locked with hers. "I'll pay for your mother's surgery. In exchange, you'll pretend our arrangement is proceeding as planned." Emma's heart raced. "You want me to... what? Pretend I'm going to sleep with you?" "I want you to help me trap whoever is trying to trap me," Blake clarified. "We'll maintain the appearance that you've agreed to the original terms. You'll come here tomorrow evening, as if for our arrangement. You'll stay until morning. What happens between those times is irrelevant. We'll simply be in the same location. And my mother's surgery will be arranged and paid for regardless of your decision." Consider it compensation for being unwittingly drawn into this situation. Emma eyed him suspiciously. Why would you help me if I say no? Because unlike whoever created this scenario, I don't exploit desperate people for personal gain. His voice carried an edge of irritation, as if her question had offended him. I exploit willing participants in the marketplace. There's a difference. Emma almost laughed at his distinction. That's your moral code? You only take advantage of people who know they're being taken advantage of. For the first time, something like surprise flickered across Blake's face. Few people spoke to him with such directness. My moral code isn't relevant to our discussion. Your mother's surgery and my reputation are. Do we have an agreement? Emma hesitated. The offer seemed too good to be true, yet the alternative, walking away and watching her mother deteriorate, was unthinkable. How do I know you'll keep your word about the surgery? You don't, Blake replied simply. But consider this. I have no reason to deceive you. If I wanted to harm you, I could do so without elaborate promises. His bluntness was strangely reassuring. Emma nodded slowly. All right, I'll help you. Good. Vance will take your mother's medical information and make the necessary arrangements. The surgery will be scheduled for next week. Blake moved toward his desk. Tomorrow you'll arrive at 8 p.m. Dress formally, as if we're going out before returning here. Vance will send a car for you. Emma felt as if she were agreeing to step into a parallel universe, one where billionaires paid for life-saving surgeries in exchange for elaborate charades. And after tomorrow night, what then? Then you return to your life, your mother recovers, and I deal with whoever is trying to undermine me. Our paths need never cross again. There was something in his tone, a dismissiveness that rankled her. You really do see people as just pieces on a board, don't you? To be moved around and then put away when the game is over. Blake regarded her with cool interest. Most people are exactly that predictable. Occasionally, someone surprises me. He paused. Perhaps you will. The following morning, Emma sat in Dr. Sullivan's office, listening in disbelief as he explained that an anonymous donor had covered her mother's surgery and that they could proceed as early as the following week. It's extremely unusual, Dr. Sullivan admitted, but the funds have been verified. Your mother is very fortunate. Fortunate. Emma wasn't sure that was the right word for any of this. Returning to her apartment, she found a package waiting for her, a sleek box with no return address. Inside was an elegant black dress that probably cost more than her semester's tuition, along with a note in precise handwriting. For authenticity, car will arrive at 7:30 p.m. As evening approached, Emma's phone buzzed with a text from her best friend, Lily. Study group at 8. You coming? Emma typed back, can't tonight, working on something for Mom. It wasn't entirely a lie. Everything she was doing was for her mother. Yet as she slipped into the black dress and stared at her transformed reflection, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into a role in a play she didn't fully understand. The car arrived precisely at 7:30, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows. The driver opened the door without a word, and Emma slid into the back seat, immediately enveloped in the smell of leather and subtle cologne. 20 minutes later, she was back in Blake's penthouse. This time he was waiting for her himself, dressed in an impeccable dark suit that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. His eyes assessed her with the same detachment as before, but there was something else there too, a flicker of approval. You look appropriate, he said, which Emma supposed was his version of a compliment. Thanks, she replied dryly. So what exactly is the plan? We just stay here all night? Not quite. Blake picked up his phone. We need to be seen. I've made dinner reservations at Elysium. Emma's eyes widened. Elysium was one of the most exclusive restaurants in Manhattan, a place where celebrities and power brokers went to see and be seen. Won't that draw attention? I thought this was supposed to be discreet. Discretion doesn't mean invisibility. It means controlling what people see. Tonight, they'll see Blake Harrison dining with a beautiful young woman. They'll speculate, as they always do, What they won't know is that we're setting a stage. Beautiful. The word slipped out so casually, yet it carried no warmth or genuine admiration. It was simply a fact in his assessment, like noting the color of her hair or the style of her dress. "And who's supposed to be watching?" Emma asked, trying to focus on the logistics rather than the unsettling way Blake regarded her. "Whoever orchestrated this scenario has been monitoring my movements." Blake reached for his suit jacket. "They'll know when we leave and when we return. The images will circulate through certain channels by morning." Emma realized she was going to be photographed with one of the most recognizable men in New York. "What about my privacy, my reputation?" "You'll be seen but not identified. Unless someone is specifically looking for you, your anonymity will be preserved." Blake paused. "Are you having second thoughts?" "No," Emma said quickly, though her stomach churned with uncertainty. "I'm committed." Blake studied her for a moment. "Remember why you're doing this. For your mother. The rest is just theater." Theater. That's exactly what it felt like as they rode the elevator down to the private garage, as the chauffeur held the door for them, as they cruised through Manhattan's glittering streets. Emma was an actress in an elaborate production, playing a PE role she never auditioned for. At Elysium, they were escorted to a prime table overlooking the restaurant. Emma felt the subtle shift in the atmosphere as people recognized Blake. The whispers, the quick glances, the calculated indifference of those who wanted to seem unimpressed by proximity to power. Blake ordered for both of them without consulting her, which annoyed Emma but seemed in keeping with the character she was presumably playing, the young woman captivated by wealth and power, willing to trade her most personal possession for financial gain. "Smile," Blake murmured, as he poured wine into her glass. "We're supposed to be enjoying each other's company." "Are we?" Emma countered quietly. "I thought I was just a prop in your counterintelligence operation." Something like amusement flickered in Blake's eyes. "You could be more than that, if you chose to engage with the situation rather than merely endure it." "What does that mean?" "It means," Blake said, leaning slightly closer, "that while we're here, we might as well have a genuine conversation. Tell me, Emma Lawson, what does a journalism student hope to achieve in a dying industry?" The question caught her off guard. "Journalism isn't dying. It's transforming." "Into what?" "Clickbait and opinion pieces masquerading as news." His tone was challenging rather than dismissive. "Into something more accessible, more immediate." Emma found herself drawn into the debate, despite her determination to remain emotionally distant. Yes, there are problems with the business model and plenty of bad actors, but the core purpose remains vital: telling stories that matter, holding power accountable. Blake's expression sharpened with interest. "And you believe you can do that? Hold power accountable?" Emma met his gaze directly. "I'm sitting across from one of the most powerful men in New York, participating in his elaborate scheme under false pretenses that we both know about. If that's not engaging with power on unusual terms, I don't know what is." Their dinner at Elysium progressed with a strange rhythm, moments of genuine conversation punctuated by stretches of calculated performance. Blake occasionally placed his hand over Emma's on the table, leaned in to whisper comments that made her smile despite herself, all while maintaining perfect awareness of who might be watching and from where. "The couple at the corner table has been tracking our every move," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "The woman is Cassandra Pierce, lifestyle blogger with connections to several board members." "Do you always analyze everyone around you?" Emma asked, taking a sip of her wine. "Always," Blake replied without hesitation. "Information is leverage. Leverage is control. And control is everything to you, isn't it?" Blake's eyes narrowed slightly. "You say that as if it's a character flaw. In my world, loss of control means vulnerability. Vulnerability means defeat." "That sounds exhausting," Emma said honestly. "Always being on guard, never trusting anyone." "On the contrary, it's clarifying. Expectations managed, outcomes predicted, disappointments avoided." The waiter appeared with their main courses, seared scallops for Emma, steak for Blake, both presented with artistic precision. Is that why you're still single? Emma asked once they were alone again. Because relationships require surrendering some control? Blake cut into his steak with surgical precision. I'm single because relationships are inefficient. They demand time and emotional resources better, allocated elsewhere. That's the most clinical description of love I've ever heard. Love, Blake said the word, as if examining a foreign concept, is largely a biochemical reaction designed to ensure reproduction and child-rearing. Once you understand its mechanisms, you can choose whether to indulge it. Emma nearly laughed. You think love is optional, something you can opt out of like a subscription service. I've managed it successfully for 43 years. Have. You? Emma studied him across the table. Or have you just convinced yourself that numbness is the same as immunity? Something flickered in Blake's expression. Irritation, perhaps, or surprise at her directness. Before he could respond, Emma noticed his attention shift to someone approaching their table. Blake Harrison, came a smooth female voice. I thought that was you. Emma turned to see a striking woman in her 40s, exuding the polished confidence of old money and social power. Senator Whitmore, Blake stood, his demeanor shifting into a mode Emma hadn't seen before, charming, attentive, yet still maintaining that essential distance. What brings you to New York? Fundraising, always fundraising, the senator replied with practiced warmth. Her curious gaze slid to Emma. And who is your lovely companion? This is Emma, Blake said, offering no last name or context. Emma, Senator Alexandra Whitmore, who may well be our next vice presidential candidate if the rumors are true. The senator laughed. Rumors are Washington's favorite currency. Speaking of which, her voice lowered conspiratorially. I hear whispers about potential leadership changes at the Harrison Group. Anything I should know about? Blake's smile remained fixed, but Emma sensed the sudden tension in his posture. Just the usual corporate chess game, Senator. Nothing worth disturbing your dinner over. Well, if anything changes, do let me know. My committee is always interested in transitions. At companies of your significance. With a final pointed look at Emma, she moved on to her own table. Blake sat back down, his expression unreadable. What was that about? Emma asked quietly. That, Blake replied, was information gathering disguised as small talk. The senator's interest suggests this succession talk has spread further than I realized. Is it really that surprising? You're not exactly known for being a team player. Blake's gaze hardened. I built the Harrison Group from a failing construction company into a global powerhouse. My methods may not inspire warm feelings, but they've created thousands of jobs and billions in value. At what cost? Emma challenged. How many people? Have you stepped over to reach the top? Only those who stood in the way of progress. Blake signaled for the check. This isn't a fairy tale, Emma. The real world rewards strength and punishes weakness. I simply acknowledge that reality, while others pretend otherwise. They departed Elysium shortly after, cameras subtly capturing their exit. Blake's hand, at the small of Emma's back, her face partially obscured as she leaned into him. The perfect tableau of the powerful man and his young conquest. Back in the car, Emma felt the strange tension between them, not sexual, but something more complex. Two people forced into intimacy by circumstance, each guarding their true selves, for different reasons. You realize, Blake said as they approached his building, that whoever is watching will expect you to stay the night. Emma nodded. I understood the arrangement. Good. Once we're inside, we can drop the pretense. But when they entered the penthouse, the atmosphere between them remained charged. Emma moved to the wall of windows, gazing out at the glittering city below. It's beautiful from up here, she said. You can't see the struggle. Blake poured himself a drink. Would you like one? No, thank you. Emma turned to face him. So what now? We just wait until morning. Now we talk, Blake said, loosening his tie. There's something I haven't told you about this situation. Emma tensed. What? The timing of this scheme coincides too perfectly with the succession rumors. I believe someone on my board is orchestrating both. creating a scandal to justify removing me from my position. Why tell me this? Because you're now involved, whether you intended to be or not, and because I'm considering a more aggressive countermove. Blake studied her with calculating eyes. You're a journalism student. How would you feel about writing the story yourself? Emma stared at him. What? Not for publication, at least not yet, but a detailed account from your perspective could be valuable leverage. The truth controlled and contained is sometimes the best defense against lies. You want me to document how someone tried to set you up using me as bait? And how you turned it around? Emma shook her head in disbelief. Wouldn't that expose both of us to public scrutiny? Only if we choose to use it. Think of it as insurance, something we hold but hope never to need. Emma moved away from the windows, processing the request. I don't know, Mr. Harrison. This goes beyond our original agreement. Call me Blake, he said, an unexpected softness in his voice. And yes, it does. I'm asking for your help, not demanding it. The admission of need, however slight, seemed significant coming from a man who prided himself on self-sufficiency. Emma found herself curious about what else might lie beneath that carefully maintained exterior. I'll think about it, she said finally. Blake nodded, accepting her non-commitment. The guest room is prepared for you. I assume you'd be more comfortable there than sharing my bed for appearance's sake. Much more comfortable, Emma agreed, though she felt an unexpected flutter at the alternative. She attributed it to the surreal nature of the situation, not any genuine attraction to this complex, controlled man. I'll show you, Blake said, leading her down a hallway to a spacious bedroom with its own ensuite bathroom. There are clothes in the closet that should fit. My assistant arranged them. Emma raised an eyebrow. Your assistant knows about this arrangement? Diane knows I requested women's clothing in your size. She doesn't question my personal matters. Must be nice to have people who don't question you, Emma remarked. Blake paused at the doorway. Actually, it's refreshing to interact with someone who does. Good night, Emma. Left alone, Emma explored the guest room, larger than her entire apartment, with a bed that felt like sleeping on a cloud. The closet contained not just nightwear, but a complete wardrobe of designer clothes in her size. The presumption both irritated and impressed her. Sleep eluded her despite the luxury surroundings. Around midnight, she gave up and wandered into the living area, surprised to find Blake still awake, working at his desk. Can't sleep? He asked without looking up. Too much on my mind, Emma admitted. Do you ever sleep? 4 to 5 hours is sufficient. Blake finally glanced up from his laptop. What's keeping you awake? Concern for your mother? Partly. Emma settled into a chair across from him, but also trying to make sense of all this. Of you. 1 minute you're this cold, calculating businessman who sees people as pawns, and the next you're helping me save my mother and asking for my help as if my opinion matters. Blake leaned back, regarding her thoughtfully. Perhaps I contain multitudes, as Whitman would say. You read poetry? Emma couldn't hide her surprise. I'm a businessman, not an automaton. Literature, art, music, I appreciate them all. I simply don't allow them to interfere with rational decision-making. But emotions aren't separate from rationality, Emma argued. They're part of how we process information, how we connect experiences to meaning. Emotions are biochemical responses that evolved for survival in conditions that no longer apply, Blake countered. In the modern world, they're often maladaptive. That's a convenient philosophy for someone who's hurt people to get ahead. Blake's expression hardened. You know nothing about what I've done or why. I know your reputation, Emma said. The companies you've dismantled, the communities affected by your strategic realignments. Progress has costs. Do you think your comfortable modern life came without displacement and disruption for someone, somewhere? At least I'm honest about the trade-offs. They fell into silence, the tension between them palpable. Why did you really agree to help me? Emma asked finally. It wasn't just to trap whoever set this up. You could have done that without arranging my mother's surgery. Blake considered her question longer than she expected. Efficiency, he said finally. Helping your mother created an ally rather than a potential liability. So it was just another transaction. Most human interactions are transactions, Emma. We exchange time, attention, resources, and emotions based on perceived value. The difference is most people disguise this reality with sentimentality. That's an incredibly cynical view. Is it? When was the last time you maintained a relationship that offered you nothing in return? Not material gain, but emotional support. Intellectual stimulation. Some form of value. Emma opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. There was a certain logic to his perspective, however cold. Even if that's true, she said finally, it doesn't mean connections with others are just about what we can extract from them. Sometimes the value is in the connection itself, in not being alone. Something shifted in Blake's expression. A momentary vulnerability quickly masked. Solitude has its advantages. No expectations to manage, no disappointments to endure. And no one to share anything with, Emma added softly. No one to witness your life. Blake held her gaze for a long moment. Perhaps that's why I'm having this conversation with you at midnight instead of sleeping. Even I occasionally tire of being witnessed only by myself. The admission hung in the air between them, unexpectedly intimate. Emma felt a strange connection, forming, not romantic exactly, but a recognition of something familiar in this supposedly unknowable man. I should try to sleep, she said, standing. Tomorrow will be complicated. Blake nodded. Indeed. Good night, Emma. Good night. Blake. As she returned to the guest room, Emma realized that despite her best intentions, she was becoming entangled in Blake Harrison's world in ways that went beyond their arrangement. She was beginning to see beneath the public persona to the complex man beneath, a man who had built walls so high that perhaps even he no longer remembered what they were protecting. In the morning, Emma awoke to the smell of coffee. She dressed in clothes from the provided wardrobe, simple jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and found Blake in the kitchen area, reading news on a tablet. Your mother's surgery has been scheduled for Thursday, he said without preamble. Dr. Sullivan will be performing it himself. I've arranged for a private room and post-operative care. Emma stared at Blake, processing his words. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, he replied, sliding a cup of coffee toward her. As I suspected, photos of us leaving Elysium are already circulating in certain circles. The narrative is developing exactly as our opponents hoped. Emma took the coffee, warming her hands around the mug. What happens now? Now you leave, visibly, from the front entrance. The car will take you home. We maintain minimal contact. For the next few days while I identify who's behind this. Blake's tone was back to business, any hint of the more reflective man from last night carefully tucked away. And then? Emma asked. And then I neutralize the threat. Blake's eyes met hers. Have you considered my proposal? About documenting what happened? Emma nodded slowly. I have, and I'll do it. But on my terms. I'll write what happened exactly as it occurred. No embellishments, no spin. If you want to use it, fine, but I maintain final approval. Blake studied her for a moment, then extended his hand. Agreed. As they shook hands, Emma was struck by how formal it seemed after the unusual intimacy of their conversations. I should go. I have class at 11. Of course. Blake walked her to the door. Vance will be in touch about your mother's surgery. And Emma... He paused. Be careful. Whoever is orchestrating this may be monitoring you as well. The warning sent a chill through her as she rode the elevator down. Outside, Emma felt exposed as she walked to the waiting car, conscious of the doorman's knowing glance, the subtle shift in the demeanor of passers-by who recognized Blake Harrison's building. The gossip machine was already in motion. Back in her apartment, Emma tried to return to normal life, attending classes, working shifts at the bookstore, visiting her mother in the hospital. But her mind kept returning to Blake Harrison and the strange connection that had formed between them. On Thursday, Emma sat in the hospital waiting room during her mother's surgery, alternating between anxiety and relief. The procedure would save her mother's life, a gift she could never have provided on her own. Yet it came with complications she hadn't anticipated. "Ms. Lawson?" A nurse approached. "Your mother's surgery went very well. Dr. Sullivan says she's stable and the procedure was a complete success." Tears of relief filled Emma's eyes. "Can I see her?" "She's in recovery now. You can see her in about an hour." As the nurse walked away, Emma's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Good news about your mother. We need to talk, car waiting outside." B. Emma hesitated, then gathered her things. Outside, the now familiar black sedan waited. Inside sat not Blake, but Vance. "Mr. Harrison sends his apologies," Vance explained as they pulled away from the hospital. "He's dealing with a situation at the company." "What kind of situation?" Vance's expression remained neutral. "I believe he'd prefer to explain himself." They drove not to Blake's penthouse, but to the Harrison Tower in Midtown. Vance escorted Emma through a private entrance and up to the executive floor, where Blake's assistant Diane waited. "He's expecting you," Diane said, her perfectly composed expression revealing nothing about what she thought of Emma's presence. Blake's office was as imposing as the man himself, spacious, minimal, with views that reminded visitors of his literal and figurative position above the city. When Emma entered, he was standing at the window, his posture rigid with tension. "What's happening?" Emma asked, dispensing with pleasantries. Blake turned, his expression grim. "The board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. They're planning to vote on my temporary removal as CEO, pending an investigation into moral misconduct and potential corporate liability." "Because of me? Because of the photos?" "That's their pretext, yes. The narrative they're constructing suggests I used company resources to arrange sexual encounters, creating both ethical and legal exposure for the Harrison Group." Blake's voice was controlled, but Emma could sense the rage beneath the surface. "But that's not what happened," Emma protested. "I can tell them." "Your involvement would only validate their version of events," Blake interrupted. "No, this requires a different approach." He moved to his desk, pulling up digital files on a large monitor. "I've been investigating the board members, looking for the mastermind." The screen displayed profiles of 5 people, 3 men, 2 women, all with the polished look of corporate power. "Edward Chambers," Blake indicated an older man with silver hair. "Traditional, conservative, always thought I was too aggressive in our European expansion. Victoria Kent, brilliant in finance, but opposed my decision to divest from healthcare last quarter. James Wilson, youngest board member, ambitious, impatient." "Which one do you suspect?" Emma asked, studying the faces. "Initially, I thought it was James. The scheme has his impatience stamped all over it." Blake's eyes narrowed. "But this morning, I discovered something unexpected." He pulled up an email chain, messages between several board members discussing contingency plans and leadership transition. "They're all involved," Emma realized. "Most of them, yes, but they're not working alone." Blake pulled up another file, an internal calendar showing a series of private meetings between Victoria Kent and someone named Marcus Blackwood. Who's Blackwood? CEO of Nexus Health, the healthcare conglomerate that wanted to acquire our medical divisions before I decided to sell to smaller regional providers instead. Blake's jaw tightened. Blackwood lost millions in potential revenue when that deal fell through. Now it appears he's working with my board to orchestrate a hostile takeover. Emma absorbed this information, her journalistic mind connecting dots. "So this was never about some moral objection to your personal life. It was business all along." "It usually is," Blake said grimly. "Sex, scandal, they're just convenient weapons. The real target is control of the Harrison Group and its assets." "What are you going to do?" Blake's expression hardened into resolve. "Fight back. But I need leverage, something concrete that exposes their plan." Emma thought for a moment. "The original advertisement. If we could trace who actually posted it." "Vance is working on that, but we need more." Blake turned to her. "That's where your documentation comes in. If you can write up everything, The E. Advertisement, our meeting, the real arrangement, the timing coinciding with Blackwood's meetings. We could use it as a countermeasure. Emma nodded slowly. I can do that, but won't publishing it expose both of us? Not necessarily publishing, at least not immediately, but having it ready, letting them know we're prepared to expose their scheme. Blake's eyes met hers. It's a calculated risk. For the next few hours, Emma worked at a desk in Blake's office, crafting a detailed account of everything that had happened. Blake moved between calls and meetings, his energy focused and intense as he prepared for the board confrontation. By evening, Emma had completed a draft. Straightforward, journalistically sound, with no emotional embellishment, but plenty of verifiable details. She watched as Blake read it, his expression unreadable. This is good, he said finally. Very good. You have a talent for clarity. Thanks, Emma replied, surprised by how much his approval pleased her. What now? Now we wait. Blake checked his watch. The board meets at 9 a.m. I've asked Vance to continue digging overnight, looking for anything that directly connects the advertisement to the board or to Blackwood. Emma stood, stretching after hours of focused writing. I should get back to the hospital. My mother will be waking up. Blake nodded. Of course. Vance will take you. As Emma gathered her things, Blake's phone rang. His expression tightened as he answered. Harrison. A pause. When? Another pause. I see. Send everything to my secure server. He hung up, his face grim. What is it? Emma asked. That was Vance. He found something, but not what we expected. Blake turned his laptop toward her. Someone leaked your document. What? How? Emma moved to the screen where a news website displayed a headline that made her blood run cold. Harrison heirs $5 million virgin, the full story. That's not possible, she whispered. I just wrote it. I haven't sent it to anyone. Not your document, a different one. Someone who claims to be you has published a detailed account of our arrangement. Only in their version, the transaction was completed. Blake's voice was controlled, but Emma could see the tension in his jaw. According to this, I paid you $5 million for your virginity, then threatened you when you tried to back out. Emma felt sick. That's insane. Why would anyone believe this? Because it confirms what they already suspect about powerful men, and because... Blake pulled up another page. They have a recording. The audio file played a conversation that sounded disturbingly like them discussing terms, expertly edited from their actual conversations at his penthouse. This is sophisticated, Blake said, his analytical mind still functioning despite the crisis. AI voice synthesis, probably using samples from security footage at Elysium. They've been planning this for months. Emma sank into a chair, reeling. My name is on this, my reputation... I know. For the first time, Blake's voice held genuine regret. I didn't anticipate this level of escalation. I thought they would target me alone. Before Emma could respond, Blake's assistant burst in. Sir, there are reporters in the lobby. At least 3 major networks and several online outlets. Security is holding them back, but they're asking for comments about the story. Blake's response was immediate and decisive. Lock down the building. No one in or out without direct authorization. Cancel all appointments for the rest of the day. Yes, sir. Diane hesitated. Sir, the board is requesting an emergency conference call. They're citing moral turpitude clauses, I imagine, Blake finished for her. Tell them I'll address them at tomorrow's meeting as planned, not before. After Diane left, Emma turned to Blake, her voice shaking with anger and fear. This is insane. They're destroying my life to get to you. I know. Blake moved to stand before her, his expression more human than she'd yet seen it. And I promise you, they will pay for that mistake. How? My name is out there now, connected to a $5 million sex scandal with one of New York's most powerful men. My academic career, my journalism career, they're over before they even started. Blake's expression hardened with resolve. No, they're not. I still have resources, influence. We can fight this." "Fight how?" Emma demanded. "The story is already spreading. By morning, everyone I know will have seen it." Then we change the narrative, not with denials, those never work, but with a different truth. Blake began pacing, his mind visibly racing. "We expose the attempted corporate takeover. We reveal that Marcus Blackwood orchestrated this entire scheme to acquire the Harrison Group by forcing me out. Will anyone even care about corporate maneuvering when there's a sex scandal to focus on?" Emma asked bitterly. "They will when they understand that you're as much a victim in this as I am, that your reputation is being sacrificed for corporate greed." Emma's journalistic instincts began to stir despite her emotional turmoil. "We'd need proof, concrete evidence connecting Blackwood to the board conspiracy and to the fake story. Vance is working on that now, and I have other resources, people, who owe me favors, who can access information others can't." A thought occurred to Emma. "My mother. If this story spreads, reporters will find her at the hospital. She's still recovering from surgery. She can't handle that kind of stress." Blake immediately picked up his phone. "Diane, arrange for private security at Metropolitan Hospital for Catherine Lawson. No press access, no unauthorized visitors. And prepare the Riverside property for 2 guests. Ms. Lawson will need a secure place for her mother's recovery." He turned back to Emma. "The Riverside house is private, secure, with medical facilities. Your mother can recover there, away from the media circus." Emma stared at him, conflicted by his efficiency in crisis. Part of her was grateful for his resources and decisive action. Another part wondered if this was just another transaction. For him, problem identified, solution implemented, variables controlled. "Why are you helping me like this?" she asked directly. "I've served my purpose in your scheme. You could distance yourself, claim I was a gold digger making false allegations." Blake's expression shifted, something almost like offense crossing his features. "Is that what you think? Of me? That I would throw you to the wolves to save myself?" "It would be the efficient solution," Emma countered, using his own logic against him. "No," Blake said firmly. "It would be expedient, not efficient. True efficiency accounts for all costs, including moral ones." "I didn't realize your calculations included morality." Blake moved closer, his intensity focused entirely on her. "There's a great deal you don't know about me, Emma. I separate emotion from business because mixing them leads to poor decisions. But that doesn't mean I lack principles. One of those principles is that I protect people who've put themselves at risk for me." The sincerity in his voice caught Emma off guard. For the first time, she felt like she was seeing beyond Blake Harrison, the billionaire CEO, to something more fundamental, the actual man beneath the carefully constructed persona. Before she could respond, Vance burst in without knocking. Something Emma suspected was unprecedented. "Sir, we have a problem. The board has called an emergency session by phone. They're voting right now to suspend you." Blake's expression darkened. "They can't do that without proper notice. They're citing emergency provisions in the charter. The vote is happening as we speak." Blake turned to Emma, his decision immediate. "We need to move now." "Move where?" "To face them directly. The board is violating their own rules because they think they have me cornered. Time to show them. They've miscalculated." He gathered his coat and gestured to Vance. "Get the helicopter. Ready. And make sure our legal team is standing by." Emma stared at him. "Helicopter?" "The board is meeting at James Wilson's estate in the Hamptons. They chose it because they thought I couldn't reach them in time. They were wrong." As they rushed toward the elevator, Emma caught Blake's arm. "Wait, this is your fight, not mine. I should stay here, try to deal with the press about my side of the story." Blake stopped, turning to face her fully. "Emma, right now you're alone against a media machine that's already decided what kind of person you are. Come with me, and you'll have a chance to confront the people who are actually responsible for this situation." His eyes held hers. "Or stay, and let them control the narrative about both of us." Put that way, the choice was clear. "I'm coming with you." As they rode the elevator to the helipad on the roof, Emma felt a strange calm settling over her. 24 hours ago, her biggest concern had been her mother's surgery. Now she was heading to a corporate showdown via helicopter with a billionaire, who had somehow become her ally in a battle neither of them had anticipated. The night air was cold on the rooftop as they approached the sleek black helicopter, its rotors already spinning. As Blake helped her aboard, Emma glimpsed the lights of the city spread out below them, millions of lives continuing undisturbed, while hers had been upended in ways she could never have imagined. "Ready?" Blake asked as they lifted off, the city falling away beneath them. Emma took a deep breath, steadying herself for whatever was coming. "As I'll ever be." The helicopter cut through the darkness over Long Island, carrying Blake and Emma toward a confrontation neither had fully anticipated. In the cabin's dim light, Blake worked his phone with intense focus, occasionally speaking into his headset to various allies and operatives. Emma observed his methodical approach to crisis. No panic, no wasted emotion, just strategic calculation. "We land in 10 minutes, Blake said finally, turning to her. "James Wilson's estate has a private helipad. They'll know we're coming, but they won't expect both of us." "What's the plan?" Emma asked, raising her voice over the thrum of the rotors. "You and I will enter together. Say nothing until I indicate. The board will be startled by your presence. They expect you to be hiding from the scandal, not confronting it." "And then?" Blake's expression hardened. "Then we change the narrative. Permanently." As they began their descent, Emma saw the sprawling estate below. A massive Hampton mansion lit up against the darkness, several luxury vehicles parked in the circular driveway. The helicopter touched down on a pad near the tennis courts, and Blake helped Emma disembark, the downwash from the rotors whipping her hair around her face. "Stay close," he instructed as they walked toward the house. 2 security guards approached them, but Blake's authoritative stride never faltered. "Harrison and guest for the board meeting," he announced, brooking no argument. The guards exchanged uncertain glances, but stepped aside. Power, Emma realized, was as much about projection as possession. They entered through glass doors into a wood-paneled study where 7 people sat around a massive table. Their conversation died instantly as Blake and Emma appeared, shock registering on every face. "I believe you were discussing my future," Blake said, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "I thought I should be present for that conversation, and I brought someone else who deserves to be heard." Victoria Kent, a sleek woman in her 50s, recovered first. "Blake, this is highly inappropriate. Ms. Lawson has no place at a board meeting." "On the contrary," Blake replied coolly, "Ms. Lawson has every right to address the people who orchestrated the destruction of her reputation for corporate gain." James Wilson, younger and more visibly agitated than the others, stood abruptly. "This is absurd. We're responding to a scandal you created, Blake. You can't possibly—" "Actually," came a new voice from the doorway, "he can." All heads turned to see Vance entering, accompanied by a distinguished older man Emma didn't recognize. "Judge Morris," Edward Chambers said, clearly surprised. "What are you doing here?" "Observing corporate governance in action," the judge replied dryly, or rather, the lack thereof. "As a major shareholder and former counsel to this company, I find tonight's proceedings deeply troubling." Blake stepped forward, command naturally radiating from him. "Let me be clear about what's happening here. This board, in coordination with Marcus Blackwood of Nexus Health, created a false scandal to force me out and facilitate a hostile takeover." Victoria Kent's laugh was brittle. "That's paranoid even for you, Blake." "Is it?" Blake nodded to Vance, who distributed tablets to everyone present. "These documents show a pattern of private meetings between board members and Blackwood over the past 6 months. They detail the creation of a shell company that purchased Harrison Group stock during manufactured dips. And most damning," he paused for effect, "they include communications about creating a moral liability situation to trigger my removal." The room fell silent as board members scrolled through the evidence, their expressions shifting from defiance to concern. Blake continued relentlessly. "The falsified advertisement, the doctored audio recordings, the fabricated account published in my name." Emma's voice was clear and strong. "You didn't just target Blake Harrison. You were willing to destroy my life, my career, my reputation, all for a corporate power play." Edward Chambers cleared his throat. These are serious allegations that require investigation, but they don't change the fact that Blake's behavior— My behavior, Blake interrupted, was to identify a scheme targeting both me and an innocent woman, and to counteract it. The only scandal here is the one you fabricated. Judge Morris stepped forward. As someone familiar with both corporate law and the Harrison Group bylaws, I must point out that this emergency session violates at least 6 procedural requirements. Any vote taken tonight would be invalid and legally actionable. Victoria Kent's composure finally cracked. You can't just waltz in here with some hastily assembled evidence and expect us to back down. The story is already public. The damage to the company's reputation can be addressed, Blake finished for her, but not by the people who caused it. He turned to Emma. Ms. Lawson, I believe you have something to share with the board. Emma stepped forward, her journalist's training steadying her nerves. I've prepared a detailed account of what actually transpired between Mr. Harrison and myself. Unlike the fabrication currently circulating, mine includes verifiable details, timestamps, and witnesses. She placed her own tablet on the table. I'm prepared to make this public, alongside evidence of corporate conspiracy and character assassination. James Wilson scoffed. Who would believe you over the story that's already out there? You're clearly in Harrison's pocket now. Emma's gaze hardened. I'm a journalism student whose education emphasizes ethics and truth. You're board members who try to destroy a young woman's reputation for financial gain. I'm comfortable letting the public decide who's more credible. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Blake used the moment to press his advantage. Here's what happens next, he stated, his tone making it clear these were not suggestions. This board meeting is adjourned with no action taken. Tomorrow morning, Victoria, Edward, and James will submit their resignations, citing personal reasons. The remaining board members will issue a statement, clarifying that recent allegations against me have been investigated and found to be without merit. And if we refuse? Victoria challenged. Blake's smile was cold. Then Judge Morris files his minority shareholder lawsuit first thing tomorrow, freezing all board actions pending investigation. Simultaneously, Ms. Lawson files her defamation suit against each of you personally, not the corporation. By noon, every business publication in the country will be reporting on the attempted hostile takeover and character assassination conspiracy. You damage your own company to win, Edward asked incredulously. I'd protect what's mine, Blake corrected. The Harrison Group will weather the storm. Will your personal reputations and finances do the same? The room fell silent as the board members exchanged glances, the calculation visible in their expressions. Finally, Edward Chambers spoke. I'll need to consult my attorney before agreeing to anything. Of course, Blake replied smoothly. You have until 9 a.m. Now I believe this meeting is adjourned. As they prepared to leave, Victoria Kent approached Emma directly. You think you've won something here, attaching yourself to Blake Harrison? Her voice dropped to a whisper. He'll discard you the moment you're no longer useful. That's what he does. Emma met her gaze steadily. Unlike you, I don't measure people's worth by their utility to me. But thank you for the concern. The helicopter ride back to Manhattan was quieter, the immediate crisis averted but larger questions still looming. Emma watched the coastline recede, trying to process everything that had happened. They'll comply, Blake said finally, breaking the silence. They have too much to lose. And Blackwood, the person who orchestrated all this, he'll be dealt with separately. Blake's tone suggested this was not a battle Blackwood would win. Emma turned to face him. What happens now? To the story. About me? It's still out there. We counter it with truth. Your account, supported by evidence of the conspiracy. The media loves a scandal, but they love exposing a scandal even more. Blake's expression softened slightly. It won't disappear overnight, but we'll change the narrative. You won't be the woman who sold herself to a billionaire. You'll be the student journalist who exposed corporate corruption. And us? What happens with? Emma gestured between them, unable to define exactly what she was asking. Blake studied her for a long moment. That depends on you. By morning, the promised resignations arrived. By noon, a carefully crafted statement from the Harrison Group clarified the regrettable misunderstandings and false information that had been circulated. Emma's account was published on a respected business news site, alongside evidence of the conspiracy targeting both her and Blake. The media storm didn't disappear, but it transformed, from a tawdry sex scandal to a story of corporate intrigue and resilience. Emma's inbox filled with interview requests from serious journalists interested in corporate ethics and media manipulation rather than salacious details. At her mother's bedside in Blake's secluded riverside property, Emma explained as much as she could about the situation. "So this man," Catherine Lawson said weakly, "arranged my surgery and is now protecting us both? What does he want in return?" Emma smiled ruefully. "That's the strange part. I'm not sure he wants anything, at least not anything simple." "Men like that always want something, Emma," her mother cautioned. "I know." Emma squeezed her mother's hand. "But people are more complicated than they first appear. Even billionaires." 3 days later, as her mother rested, Emma sat in the property's sunroom working on responses to the more reputable journalists who had reached out. A soft knock at the door announced Blake's arrival. "How is she?" he asked, entering with uncharacteristic hesitation, as if uncertain of his welcome in this more personal space. "Better. The doctors say she's recovering well." Emma set aside her laptop. "The board members actually resigned?" As promised, Blake remained standing, maintaining a careful distance. Blackwood's company stock dropped 12% after our counter-moves. His board is now questioning his leadership. Poetic justice. Indeed. Blake finally took a seat across from her. "Columbia University called. They're offering to defer your semester if you need time away from campus while this settles down." Emma nodded gratefully. "That would help. And the bookstore said my job is secure whenever I'm ready to return." They fell into silence, the unspoken tension between them growing with each passing moment. "I've been thinking about what happened," Emma said finally. "About you, me, all of it." Blake waited, his expression guarded yet attentive. "You said once that all relationships are transactions," Emma continued, "that people exchange time and attention based on perceived value." "I remember." "I've been trying to figure out what this exchange between us is. What you're getting from helping me, protecting me, even after the immediate crisis has passed." Blake's gaze was steady. "And what conclusion have you reached?" "That maybe you were wrong. Maybe not everything can be reduced to utility and exchange." Emma leaned forward slightly. "Or maybe what we value in exchanges isn't always what we think." A ghost of a smile touched Blake's lips. "An intriguing theory. When we met, you told me control was everything to you. That vulnerability meant defeat." "I did. Yet you made yourself vulnerable by helping me. You could have contained the scandal more easily by cutting me loose, but you didn't." Emma studied him carefully. "Why?" Blake was silent for a long moment, his eyes revealing an internal struggle between habitual guardedness and something new. "Perhaps," he said finally, "I discovered that some principles matter more than perfect control, that some connections have value beyond calculation." "Connections," Emma repeated softly. "Is that what we have?" Blake stood, moving to the window that overlooked the Hudson River. "I don't have a simple answer for you, Emma. I've spent my life avoiding complications, treating people as variables to be managed, and then you refused payment and walked away that first night, and nothing has made sense since." Emma joined him at the window, close but not touching. "For what it's worth, you've confused me too. The cold businessman who arranged my mother's surgery, the strategist who risked his company to protect my reputation, the man who talks about transactions but acts according to principles. Perhaps we're both more complicated than our own narratives about ourselves." Blake turned to face her directly. "I don't know what happens next between us. I only know that I'm not ready for there to be nothing." Emma smiled, the first genuine smile in days. "Well, that's something we can agree on." "Your life will stabilize," Blake continued. The media will move on to new scandals. Your mother will recover. You'll return to your studies, your writing. And you? Will you go back to being the untouchable Blake Harrison, seeing people as pieces on a board? His expression softened. I don't think I can. Not entirely. You've disrupted my carefully ordered worldview, Emma Lawson. Made me question assumptions I've held for decades. Good, Emma said simply. Question more of them. Blake laughed, a real laugh that transformed his face. I have a feeling you'll ensure that happens regardless of my preference. Probably. Emma felt something shifting between them, the tension giving way to something more genuine, unscripted. I should finish those email responses. And I have a company to rebuild. Blake moved toward the door, then paused. Have dinner with me tomorrow. Not for appearances, not as part of any scheme, just dinner. Emma considered him for a moment, this complex man who had entered her life through the strangest of circumstances and somehow become significant in ways neither of them had anticipated. I'd like that, she said finally. As Blake left, Emma returned to the window, watching as he walked to his car. She thought about control, how they had both lost it and found it again in unexpected ways. How sometimes the things that seem most certain are the first to crumble under pressure, while connections formed in crisis can prove surprisingly resilient. 6 months later, Emma stood at a podium in Columbia's journalism school, presenting her award-winning investigation into corporate ethics and media manipulation. Her mother sat in the front row, healthy and proud, next to Blake Harrison, whose presence still caused whispers, but now for different reasons. The article that had won her the Student Journalism Award wasn't about a scandal or a billionaire's secret arrangement. It was about power, accountability, and the human capacity for change. It was about systems designed to prioritize profit over people and the courage required to challenge those systems from within. As she concluded her speech to enthusiastic applause, Emma caught Blake's eye in the audience. His subtle nod conveyed everything words couldn't: pride, respect, and a connection that had evolved beyond any transaction either could have imagined. Later, as they walked across campus together, Blake asked, "Are you ever tempted to write the other story, the personal one between us?" Emma shook her head. Some stories aren't meant to be published. They're just meant to be lived. Blake took her hand, a gesture that still surprised her sometimes. This man who once equated touch with vulnerability, now initiating connection without calculation. What happens next in our story? He asked, a question that would have been impossible for the Blake Harrison she first met. A man who planned everything, controlled everything, left nothing to chance or choice. Emma squeezed his hand. I don't know. And that's what makes it interesting. As they continued walking, Blake realized he no longer felt the compulsive need to calculate every outcome, to maintain perfect control of every variable. For the first time in decades, he was living in the question rather than demanding an answer. And in that space of uncertainty, he had found something he never knew he was missing. Not a perfectly controlled life, but a fully experienced one. And Emma, watching him evolve from the man who once saw people as numbers to someone capable of genuine connection, discovered that some journeys are too profound for words, even for a writer. Some transformations can only be witnessed through presence. Some stories are told not in what is said, but in what is chosen, again and again, each day. Not through a single dramatic gesture, but through the quiet decision to remain when it would be easier to leave. To see when it would be simpler to look away. To choose vulnerability when control seems safer. Their story had begun with a proposition, continued through confrontation, and arrived somewhere neither had mapped, a place where worth wasn't measured in dollars or utility, where connection couldn't be reduced to transaction, and where the most valuable exchange was the simple, profound gift of being witnessed by another who truly sees you, not as you present yourself to the world, not as others define you, but as you are in all your complexity, seen, known, chosen anyway. Fim da Historia, loved, the price of control. This emotional journey through power, vulnerability, and unexpected connection is just the beginning. For more captivating stories that explore the complexities of human relationships, subscribe to our Channel and click the notification bell so you never miss our weekly releases. Did Emma and Blake's transformation move you? Let us know in the comments below. Your engagement helps us create more content that resonates with life's deepest truths. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed watching their walls come down as much as we enjoyed creating it. Remember, every great story deserves to be shared, just like you've shared your time with us today.